Quick review that we started talking about the cytoplasm after having been through the cell membrane, the nucleus, and the difference between critters with nuclei, and not. And we looked at the cytoskeleton, which consists of these microtubules, which are all about moving things inside the cell or moving a whole cell, and microfilaments, which are all about holding the cell's shape and changing its shape when that shape does need to change. And then we mentioned ribosomes, which are kind of the protein factories of the cell, and look at their structure. From here, we are going into a group of organelles that are collectively called the endomembrane system. There's a group of organelles that kind of interact with each other enough that we teach them as a group. They all have their own membranes. In other words, they're all bound by lipid bilayers. And they all sort of coordinate to do a couple of things. Number one, they provide a surface for certain materials to be made and for those materials to then be moved around. So ribosomes will stick to some of this surface, and that'll be the place that they manufacture proteins. And then those proteins will get moved around inside the cell, maybe exported from the cell. Lipids get made in parts of the endomembrane system, and they get moved around. And finally, they will often package, and by package I usually mean wrap a membrane bubble around materials like proteins and lipids, and move them around inside the cell that way, and sometimes ship them out. So you can kind of look at that diagram and get some idea of what happens here. And notice that all these membranes are kind of continuous with the nuclear membrane. And you can see things going back and forth in between these different clusters of membrane, which should look fairly familiar from the coloring page that you're done with. So the parts of this endomembrane system that you'll need to know are the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. We'll spell that out when we focus on it more. The Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, vacuoles, and various types of vesicles. So this is one of those days where suddenly you've got a bunch of new vocabulary words. Those are the components of the endomembrane system. We'll look at them each individually. I just want you to know about this connection, where they are kind of this pipeline where things get manufactured and moved around and sometimes exported and sometimes imported. They're all sort of connected. Okay. Starting with the endoplasmic reticulum. This is a kind of interlocking system of membranes that can run all throughout the cell. Let's say protein manufacturing and transport. This membrane has two flavors. The rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is rough in appearance. That's why they named it that, because you can see it under the microscope and notice that it's kind of dotted. And from your coloring page, what's it dotted with? Remember? Nope. Good, ribosomes. It's rough because of ribosomes. This is the place that most ribosomes stick to while they are actually doing protein manufacturing. And then those proteins kind of just get dumped right into the middle of the ER and get messed with and then sent somewhere. So newly modified proteins go from the ribosomes in there. They get modified. Sometimes they get stuck together with other proteins. And then they get marked for transport. So that's the rough ER. Then there are sections of the ER that look different because not only are they smooth, but you can kind of see they look a little more, I don't know, bubbly. I don't know how to describe it. Honeycombed. Anyway, that's the smooth ER. Smooth because there's no ribosomes on it. And the smooth ER is there because so much of the cell is made of membrane. Like we say the cell membrane, but really the whole cell is made of membrane. But we actually sometimes call it the plasma membrane. So you understand we're not talking about the internal membranes. The plasma membrane is the outside one. Almost everything else in there is also made of membrane. So something has to be making and replacing membrane parts, and that's the smooth ER. This is also a place where calcium gets stored. In your muscle cells, in fact, there is a huge overdeveloped endoplasmic reticulum called the sarcoplasmic reticulum that stores tons of calcium, and that calcium is what allows your muscles to contract. You'll learn that if you take physiology next year, which is a great class. Questions about the ER? We doing okay? This is where it starts to get, I start to get that look. Tomorrow or Monday or Tuesday, we'll look back at that how to study for this class page maybe and talk about it a little bit. So proteins go here first when they get made, right? They go to the rough ER, they get marked for where they're going. Their next stop is often the Golgi. You can think of it a little bit like the shipping department of the cell. It's more of a stack of membranes than a network like the ER is. And this is usually protein's next stop after the ER. And here they get further marked. They get carbohydrate tags stuck on them or various proteins stuck onto them. And then the Golgi kind of ships them wherever they're going. Sometimes that's somewhere inside the cell. Sometimes they send them to the cell membrane and fuse the membrane they pack around them with the cell membrane, expelling them to the outside of the cell. So the kind of typical, and there's lots of exceptions, but the path I want you to know that a typical protein can take looks like this, sort of a flow chart, right? DNA codes for it, RNA takes the information out, sends it to the ribosome dumps it into the ER sends it to Golgi, and Golgi marks it for its final destination, wherever that is. So those are the biggies. Couple of side trips that a molecule, a protein, some material can take off of the endomembrane system. First is the vacuole. We call something a vacuole when we wrap a membrane around it and just kind of let it sit there. This is a storage organelle. Can store food, can store water, can store anything. One interesting thing about the vacuole is that plant cells, typical plant cells, have a big, overdeveloped one that stays, it holds a bunch of water and stays under fairly high pressure. That water is kind of pressurized in that vacuum. What do you think that would be? What's the central vacuole of a plant for?
Yeah, sometimes to keep the cell clean.
It's not to keep the cell clean. Other ideas? Yeah.
Is it water itself?
It's not because the plant needs water for photosynthesis and life processes. It does, but that's not what it uses that water for. What's the basic body plan of a plant? Like, what does a plant How is a plant shaped? Most of them have essentially the same plant. You're pointing, Amanda. Upward? Why upward? So the plant needs the sun. I'll be back to you guys. Plant needs as much sunlight as possible, and so it makes sense to get which part of the plant as high as possible. Which part of the plant needs to reach the sun? The leaves. So we got a whole bunch of leaves trying to get as close to the sun as possible, or at least closer to the sun than everybody else. But then they can't leave the ground, right? Why? They need water. So their roots have to be in the ground, but their leaves need to be as high as possible. What do we call the part in between? That's the stem, right? Most plants have like a big, long, skinny stem, leaves on top, roots on the bottom. That's a pretty vulnerable situation, isn't it? Like, it'd be a bummer. So first way they tackle that is cell walls. We talked about that. That's about rigidity, right? It's not enough. If you want your stem to be real skinny, you're going to need more than that, unless you're a tree. And most, a lot of plants don't have that wood material to support them. So the way they solve that is water pressure. They pressurize the central vacuoles in their stem cells, and that adds rigidity. Water is kind of fantastically resistant to you know this if you've ever done a belly flop, right? Like water will really, really resist inertia, or it has a lot of inertia, I guess would be the physics way. I probably screwed that up. Anyway, so that's why they have this pressurized central vacuole. And when they lose that pressure, which is called turgor pressure, what do we call it? When plants lose water pressure. Close? Wilting. Yeah, wilting is when plants lose that water pressure. Good. The last one. This one's about waste breakdown. If you've got something in the endomembrane system and you don't want it to be what it is anymore, you send it into a lysosome. A lysosome is basically the garbage disposal of the cell. It happens to only be in animal cells. And basically, it's just got a bunch of nasty enzymes in it that will totally break stuff down. Mostly, this is for dissolving old, worn-out cell parts. Okay. So that is mostly the endomembrane system. And that's probably good for Friday notes. We colored. Now let's draw. Ready for some drawing? This isn't, you know what? We can put science aside today. We're just going to draw. Just going to draw. First of all, you're going to take your tape that you brought, and you're going to tape those two pieces of paper together like this. I guess that's what, hamburger? Not hot dog? Yeah, this way. Just lay them down next to each other. Don't overlap them, and just lay a strip of tape down on them. Cole, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I would like to be an aerospace engineer.
Aerospace engineer, love it. Would you like to make a lot of money? Tell me about the house you want to live in.
I want to live in a cabin in Kentucky.
A cabin in Kentucky. I like your style. That's good. So I'm going to need you to kind of pretend you're someone else then today, because I'm kind of like you. But what you need to do today is pretend you are mega rich and your style is not cabin in Kentucky. Your style is like bowling alley in the basement, like swimming pool in the West Wing. And you are going to design your dream house. It's the one on the left. You can make it however you want it to be. You can draw it however you want to draw it. Top down, maybe you're artsy and you can do some perspective for me. That's awesome. It just has to have these parts, right? And they have to be labeled as such, right? Hallways with moving sidewalks. You don't walk places. You have a big house. You're too rich to walk. You got tech for that, right? You can transport yourself around your house. You need a generator. You don't want to be dependent on the man for power. A mailbox. You got to be in there somewhere. A fence with some sort of security system to keep the riffraff out. A way of getting rid of your trash, and a storage building. As long as you have those things, your house is your house. You make it yours. You be creative with it. No science involved today. Just draw your dream house. Eli.
I put that all on a giant boat. If that would be my dream.
Yeah. You can have a houseboat. That's awesome.
Is this pretty much just every part of the cell household?
No. This is just a house, Logan. Why would you think otherwise? Why would you think I had some ulterior motive? It stings a little, man. No, you're totally right. Yeah, but have fun in the meantime.